What happens when the U.S. strips a cartel, kingpin of his fortune and the money, meant to protect his family, just disappears overnight? The president of Mexico doesn't want to designate the cartels as terrorists and doesn't want to expose the dirty politicians that they're involved in. Our Mexican government, Elmo, was one of the most PR prolific and powerful drug traffickers in this world. His partner was El Chapo. They were co-founders of the Sinaloa cartel. Mexico will ask the United States to return money and assets seized from former Mexican drug lord Ismael Elmo Zambada. Those are the words of Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum this week. And this is the story of how $15 billion vanished into U.S. hands, leaving cartel families furious, Mexico's leaders scrambling, and violence erupting in the streets. And it's only the beginning, because the fight over that fortune is about to reshape both countries. Let's unpack it all right now. The shot came in a Brooklyn courtroom. At the end of August, Ismael Zimbab, also known as Elmo, pleaded guilty in New York to federal drug trafficking charges. He's accused of shipping at least 1.5 million kilos of cocaine since 1980, most of it to the U.S. Elmo, co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel, who once dodged authorities for 50 years, just pleaded guilty and agreed to forfeit $15 billion in assets to the United States. For prosecutors, it was a historic blow. Over the last 3 decades, Elmo and his accomplices made billions of dollars, hundreds of millions each year they were making by bringing poisonous drugs into our country. For cartel families, though, it was the start of a nightmare. The Department of Justice didn't just freeze bank accounts. They essentially erased decades of cartel profits. For lieutenants, wives, and children who lived off that empire, the math was brutal. Everything they thought they owned now belonged to Washington. Their reign of terror is over. Inside cartel culture, money equals protection. It pays for soldiers to guard your family, lawyers to fight your cases, and politicians to look the other way. Without it, power collapses fast. That's why Elmo's sudden forfeit sent Sinaloa factions into chaos. During his plea hearing, Elmo openly admitted, the organization I led promoted corruption in my home country by paying police officers, military commanders, and politicians. The guilty plea confirmed corruption, then weaponized it by admitting he ran Mexico like a parallel government. Elmo made his own allies radioactive. Anyone linked to him now looked vulnerable, broke, and exposed. Families of mid-level bosses began demanding answers. Where was their inheritance? How would they pay their private armies? Rumors spread that the U.S. already moved, seized funds into secret accounts, cutting Mexico out entirely. More and more people are quoting a statement Claudia Sheinbaum reportedly made in Mexico last week. If the United States government were to recover resources, then we would be asking them for them to be given to Mexico. That's our drug money. Keep your hands off of it. The Mexican president saying the panic was instant. Cartel families feared betrayal not only by Trump, but also by their own government. And as the money vanished, paranoia turned to violence. But if the Sinaloa clan was panicking, Mexico's president was seething. Here's why Claudia Sheinbaum wants Mayo's money for her own country. When the U.S. announced the $15 billion forfeit, Mexico's new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, didn't celebrate. She went on the offensive. In press conferences, she made it clear that Washington had no right to keep the fortune and demanded, not requested, that Trump give it back. CBS says Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said Wednesday she would ask the United States to share the $15 billion it expects to extract from convicted Mexican drug lord Ismael Elmo Zambada with her country's poor. Her argument sounded noble on paper. Sure, she claimed all the cash should go to Mexico's poorest citizens. But the timing was explosive because just days earlier, Elmo himself admitted that his empire existed by bribing police, generals, and politicians for 3 decades straight. Elmo operated with impunity at the highest levels of the Mexican drug trafficking world by paying bribes to government officials, by bribing law enforcement officers. He controlled corrupt officials and officers who protected his workers and his drug shipments that traveled from Mexico into our country. That's where the anger comes in. How could Mexico's government deny corruption in one breath and then demand the spoils of that corruption in the next? To U.S. officials, it looked less like charity and more like cartel protection dressed in politics. As you've heard, drug kingpin Ishmael Zambada Garcia, also known as Elmo, has confessed to a lifetime of crime in service to the Sinaloa cartel. Elmo and his ex-partner, El Chapo, were famous for having high-ranking politicians in their pockets. Claudia Sheinbaum had promised to be tougher on crime when she took office. So what's happening now? Critics erupted. American senators mocked the hypocrisy. Security experts warned that funneling billions back into Mexican coffers without oversight would be like wiring it straight to cartel payrolls. And within Mexico, a few politicians echoed the sentiment. Sheinbaum is trying to keep the same corrupted networks afloat. But Sheinbaum didn't back down. By framing the money as Mexico's property, she painted the U.S. as a thief, fueling nationalist anger while dodging questions about who really benefited. The stage was set for a bitter standoff between Mexico's people and the narco state they've been forced to live under. And if this sounds outrageous, wait until you see what happens when one senator risks her life to call Mexico a cartel and government on live TV. As Claudia Sheinbaum's demands got more aggressive, one voice inside Mexico said another thing entirely. Senator Tiz, welcome to Fox No GCS. I'm just going to get right to it. Is Mexico a narco state? Yes, it is. And we all Mexicans know about it. And Mexicans are afraid of the alliance between the Mexican government and the cartels that have infested our nation. Senator Lily Tells went on international TV and called her country what everyone feared, but few dared say, a narco state. She accused the ruling Morena party of being financed by cartel money and warned that Mexico was sliding into authoritarian capture. That confession made Sheinbaum's denials sound hollow. Yet instead of probing cartel ties, the president turned her fury on Tells. President of Mexico is furious. She's calling Mexican Senator Lily T's a traitor for coming on Fox Lotus with me a few days ago, and she accused Tells of betraying her own country by inviting foreign intervention. Now, in Mexico, being labeled a traitor isn't political. It's a straight-up death sentence. The question is whether Sheinbaum really thinks like cartels or is just trying to score nationalist points. Meanwhile, cartel allies who had thrived under state protection were watching closely. A senator publicly accusing the government of being bought meant exposure, and exposure meant danger. Journalists, activists, and even local mayors have been executed for much less than Lily is saying here. The help from the United States to fight the cartels in Mexico is absolutely welcome, and that is how the majority of Mexicans feel. The only ones who don't, like that President Trump, is sending help and trying to support Mexicans against the cartels are the narco politicians. That includes President Sheinbaum. The U.S. framed ELO as a terrorist whose empire is dead. Lily's warning showed the opposite, that the empire still lived embedded in Mexico's power structure. Her courage just turned her into a target. Here's how the cartel reacted. The money vanished into U.S. hands, and cartel families in Sinaloa erupted. Word spread that not a cent of Elmo's empire would be returned. This was their inheritance, their security going forward with Mayo in prison for life. And with one court ruling, it was gone. Executions started almost immediately. The violence is increasing not only in Tijuana, but all the border towns across the next the United States of America, and in the central parts of Mexico. This is just the cartel operating. How they can dismantle a body and how they can disappear a body. Men accused of snitching were gunned down in public. Houses tied to Elmo's lieutenants were burned. The old Sinaloa networks turned on each other, convinced someone had leaked the money trails. This is the paranoia that turns a cartel to shreds from within once the kingpins start falling down. Experts say it was bound to happen after El Mayo's arrest anyway. But with Trump's extra hard crackdown, it's all happening at an unprecedented pace. Also, yesterday there was also 3 people forcing at a plaza fighting in a plaza. One of them had a gun. And just so you know, today it was reported 5 members of a Mexican National Regional Band. They were found dead. Now cartels know that every neighbor could be working for the DEA and every rival smell blood in the water. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi said about Mayo and his disciples. Elmo also ensured that the Sinaloa cartel operated and protected its drug trafficking business by relying on extreme violence. They used military-grade weapons and directed hitmen to kill their adversaries. They committed gruesome assassinations, kidnappings, and horrible crimes to maintain discipline within their own organization. That discipline now snapped, though. Violence tore through Sinaloa as Elmo's name became a liability. Families who once lived under his protection now feared for their lives. Children of lieutenants were put into hiding. Soldiers roamed the streets, shooting anyone suspected of betrayal. And it goes without saying, thousands more are living in 24/7 fear right now in many parts of Mexico. And if you think the bodies piling up in Sinaloa are shocking, the next twist is even worse. Because Beijing is watching and China is ready to buy influence where the U.S. just created chaos. The fight over Elmo's $15 billion is starting to look like a fight over who owns Mexico's future, and U.S. officials are warning if Washington keeps the cash, Beijing could swoop in with its own billions, buying loyalty from the same politicians Elmo once bribed. Every day tons of chemicals that are used to create synthetic drugs like amphetamine, and all are shipped from China to Mexico in China's undeclared war against America and her citizens. The numbers are staggering. Just one bus this month seized over 700,000 pounds of precursor chemicals shipped from Shanghai to Mexican ports under Sinaloa control. Officials said it would have made nearly 500,000 pounds of. That's worth more than $500 million on U.S. streets. They would have been used to make 420,000 pounds of methamphetamine, which would have a street value here in Houston of $569 million. That's the scale America is up against. While Mayo's loyals are complaining of losing their inheritance, China is quietly running the supply chain that feeds into the U.S. And it's so much more than drugs, too. On the trade side, Beijing is embedding itself into Mexico's economy through factories, ports, and even a new canal project in an effort to avoid U.S. tariffs. Chinese companies are moving their raw materials and operations to Mexico. Billions in Chinese investment are pouring into northern Mexico. From car factories to logistics hubs, once those goods are stamped made in Mexico, they slip past U.S. tariffs under the USMCA trade deal. The same networks that once moved Elmos are now moving Chinese electronics, vehicles, and precursors. It's not even a cartel issue anymore. It's straight up geopolitics. The $15 billion seized from one kingpin looks small compared to the rivers of Chinese cash reshaping Mexico's economy. The north part of Mexico is getting invaded with foreign investment, and people are coming from all over the world, from Asia, from Europe, from South America, even from Africa, and they're trying to build plants and manufacturing facilities to enter the United States market. This fight is no longer local, and if those $15 billion are put into fighting this, will this ignite a global war? The $15 billion seized from Elmo Zambada is supposed to be America's victory lap, just like his guilty plea and incoming life sentence. Thanks to the relentless work of our prosecutors and our federal agents, Elmo will spend the rest of his life behind bars. He will die in a U.S. federal prison where he belongs. Justice is pretty much the main word heard out of Trump or his spokespeople's mouths these days. But behind the headlines, rumors are growing that the U.S. itself isn't as clean as it claims. Reports have resurfaced about Fort Bragg, where special forces soldiers were tied to trafficking networks and unexplained killings. An HBO project called the Fort Bragg Cartel is already in development, promising to expose how narco money bled into America's own military elite. So, if even U.S. troops were profiting from cartel pipelines, then who really controls that $15 billion? And if both Mexico and Washington have dirty hands, what does it mean when Trump declares himself the only one tough enough to spend it? Because make no mistake, this money is now a war chest. Over the last 3 decades, Elmo and his accomplices made billions of dollars, hundreds of millions each year. They were making, think about that, hundreds of millions per year now locked in U.S. accounts. In cartel math, that bankroll means soldiers on payroll, judges on retainer, and politicians in your pocket. Take it away, and the entire chain of power collapses. Keep it though, and you control who rebuilds it. I think there's a huge market for Chinese product in Mexico, but the big ticket item here is the U.S. market. That's why China's coming to Mexico. So, here's the real nightmare. As Mexico demands its share, China is writing bigger checks. Beijing is shipping factories, cars, and precursors into Mexico at record levels. In just 18 months, container trade from China to Mexico surged over 20%. Chinese money is already buying the same loyalty Elmo once purchased with dollars. So what happens if Trump uses Elmo's billions to fight cartels while Beijing bankrolls the other side? Who wins that proxy war? Washington, Beijing, or the cartels who thrive on both? The north part of Mexico is getting invaded with foreign investment. Invaded, that's the word used on the ground in northern Mexico. And it's not just factories. Experts say it's all part of a strategic pivot. Every truck crossing the border could carry Chinese electronics or cartel guns. The lines between them are blurring fast. So yeah, America holds Elmo's $15 billion. Jackpot. But what can that money really do in the cartel war now that they've become a transnational network? And if Trump weaponizes it, does he risk igniting a war far bigger than Sinaloa? Now, we have to see whether $15 billion of narco cash becomes the trigger for the next great conflict between the U.S., Mexico, and China. And if that sounds insane, what if I told you the fuse may already be burning?